Section 1. Welcome to Westeros, where nothing is ever just what it seems. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you have watched something so many times that it stops being exciting and starts being comfortable, like a favorite piece of music you have memorized down to the last breath between notes. Game of Thrones, for a lot of us, became exactly that kind of thing. A world so thoroughly built, so lovingly detailed in every frame, that even after the credits rolled on that final episode, however you felt about how it ended, you could close your eyes and picture Winterfell covered in snow, the narrow sea gray and choppy, the streets of King's Landing catching the late afternoon light. It became a place you knew. But here is the thing about a place you know. The more time you spend there, the more you notice. The little details that were always sitting quietly in the corner, waiting. The prop that meant something. The piece of dialogue that was doing two jobs at once. The costume that was whispering a secret, while the character wearing it was talking about something entirely different. Tonight, that is where we are going. Back through all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, moving slowly, settling into the world at a gentler pace than the show itself ever really allowed. We are going to walk through 135 hidden details, Easter eggs, visual callbacks, pieces of foreshadowing, and clever nods that the writers, directors, costume designers, prop makers, and set decorators tucked into the show across nearly a decade of production. Some of these you may have caught on your first watch. Some you would only notice on a third or fourth rewatch, when you already knew where everything was going and your eye was free to wander. And some are so deeply hidden, so patiently placed, that the people who actually filmed them only understood what they meant years later. We are going to move through this gently. There is no rush here. Think of this as a slow walk through Westeros at night, when the fires are burning low and the castle corridors are quiet, and you have all the time you need to look at the things that are usually rushed past in the daylight. Before we get started, a quick word about the nature of Easter eggs and foreshadowing in this show specifically. Game of Thrones was unusual in television because it was working from source material, George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire novels, that had already been in the world for years before filming began. Martin had planted seeds in his books that fans had been theorizing about for over a decade. When showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss began adapting it, they inherited not just the story, but an entire ecosystem of hidden meaning. So, some of what we are going to talk about tonight comes directly from the books, translated carefully into visual storytelling. Some of it was added by the show's production team. And some of it, this is worth keeping in mind, may have been happy accidents that the show later chose to lean into and make meaningful. Martin himself has said he worries that sharp-eyed book readers have already figured out his ending before it ever made it to the page. When you build a world that thoroughly, the hidden things almost cannot help but add up. They are the fingerprints of someone who cared enormously about every corner of the world they created. So, let's begin. Pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, let the screen go dark if you want. And let me take you back to Westeros, one quiet detail at a time. We will start at the very beginning, not just episode 1, but the opening credits themselves. Because even before a single character has appeared on screen, even before a word of dialogue has been spoken, Game of Thrones is already hiding things in plain sight. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now and what time it is. There is something wonderful about knowing this is being watched from a bedroom in Australia at 3 in the morning, or from a living room in Canada on a Sunday afternoon, or from somewhere you would not expect at all. And while you're there, consider subscribing if you want more of this. There is a lot more world left to explore. Now, the opening credits. Section 2. The opening credits, a living map that was always telling you more than you thought. Most people, by their 3rd or 4th episode of Game of Thrones, had stopped really watching the opening credits. The theme music was deeply familiar. The mechanical map had been seen enough times to feel routine. You knew the general geography. You had the basic layout of Westeros in your head. This is exactly when the show was hiding the most from you. Easter egg, number 1. The map only shows you where the episode is going. This is one that, once you know it, completely changes how you experience those 90 seconds at the start of every episode. The locations that appear in the opening credits, the cities that rise out of the mechanical map as the camera moves across it, are not a fixed list. They change from episode to episode, and they change specifically to reflect where the action in that episode is going to take place. If Daenerys is not in an episode, Meereen does not appear in the credits. If the story never travels beyond the wall, Castle Black might be absent. This sounds simple when you say it plainly, but the implication is remarkable. The show was essentially giving you a preview, a geographic spoiler, if you want to call it that, before the episode had even started. If you were watching carefully, you could sometimes predict which storylines would appear just by watching which locations the camera chose to visit. There are a handful of locations that appear in almost every single episode: King's Landing, Winterfell, The Wall. These are the constants, the fixed stars of the Westerosi sky. But everything around them shifts and adjusts. The show's creators, the production company Elastic who built the credits sequence, worked with the showrunners to update it for each episode. Some locations appear in only 3 or 4 episodes across the entire run of the show. The twins, Walder Frey's seat, appears rarely, which makes those appearances carry a particular kind of weight in retrospect. Easter egg number 2. The astrolabe at the center connects to the Citadel. Right at the heart of the opening credits, there is a golden instrument that the camera circles before it begins its journey across the map. It is ringed with decorative bands, and if you look closely, those bands are engraved with scenes that appear to depict important historical events from Westeros's past. For 6 full seasons, this object sat at the center of the opening sequence, without most viewers giving it a second thought. It was just a beautiful prop, part of the aesthetic. Then in the season 6 finale, Samwell Tarly finally arrived at the Citadel in Old Town. He was shown into the Great Library, and as the camera moved through that extraordinary space, shelves reaching up to impossibly high ceilings, books going back hundreds of years, it passed over a series of objects hanging from the ceiling like chandeliers, catching the light and throwing it across the pages of 1,000 books. They were armillary spheres, celestial instruments, and they were unmistakably, recognizably, the same kind of object that had been sitting at the center of the Game of Thrones title sequence all along. The show was, in its quiet way, suggesting something. The opening credits sequence, the mechanical map, the armillary sphere at its center, the whole clockwork vision of the world, was perhaps the view from inside the Citadel. Perhaps it was the way the Meisters see the world, tracked and measured and recorded. Perhaps, some fans went further and suggested, it was the view from inside Sam's perspective, as he eventually became the chronicler of everything that happened. The idea being that the show we were watching was the history Sam wrote down. The production company behind the sequence, when asked about this connection, confirmed it was intentional. They imagined, when designing the credits, a figure they described as a kind of mad monk in a tower, watching everything and keeping track. The Citadel is, among other things, exactly that. A place of watchmen, of record keepers. Easter egg, number 3. The decorative rings depict the history of Westeros. Those engraved bands around the central astrolabe are not purely decorative. If you pause the opening credits and look very closely at what those images actually show, you can make out scenes that reference events from the history of Westeros. The defeat of the dragons, the conquest of Aegon Targaryen. Later, in the Season 8 revision of the credits, new scenes were added to the bands, scenes depicting the Red Wedding, Robert's Rebellion, and the War of the Five Kings. The history of the show's events was being literally inscribed onto the instrument at the center of the credits as the show progressed. Season 8 brought a significant revision to the entire opening sequence, and this is where the 4th Easter egg lives. Easter egg number 4. The Season 8 credits changed to show the Night King's invasion. When the final season began, the opening credits were overhauled in a way that was immediately obvious, but also deeply layered. The map now showed the breach in the wall, the point where the Night King and his army crossed into Westeros, a moment that had happened in the Season 7 finale. But it was the way the invasion was shown that caught viewers off guard. As the camera moved over the terrain south of the wall, the map's surface flipped from its usual warm colors to icy blue tiles. These tiles spread southward, moving across the landscape like pieces on a board, representing the army of the dead advancing. The production team explained this was a deliberate nod to classic strategy board games, the idea of pieces moving across a map toward a target, but they also pointed out that the speed of the tiles was meaningful. They moved quickly. The Night King was not dawdling. Easter egg, number 5. Winterfell changed in the credits to show it had fallen and been retaken. Over the course of the show, Winterfell's appearance in the opening credits changed multiple times to reflect the castle's real-world condition. When Theon Greyjoy seized it in Season 2, and it was later burned, the model of Winterfell in the credits reflected this. The Great Hall was altered. The weirwood tree that was a constant presence in the Stark home appeared differently depending on who held the castle. In Season 8, Winterfell's credits model included a detail that fans immediately pored over. The weirwood tree, which had been there from the very first episode, was depicted more prominently than ever before. Given that the weirwood tree, and Bran's connection to it, became so central to the final arc of the show, this felt less like coincidence and more like the credits quietly emphasizing what had always mattered most. Easter egg number 6. The Red Keep showed the mosaic floor in Season 8. When the Season 8 credits moved over King's Landing and zoomed into the Red Keep, a new detail appeared that had never been visible before. The floor of the throne room was now shown to contain a mosaic, an intricate inlaid map of Westeros, the same map that Cersei would stand on and strategize over in that famous scene where she stares down at the continent she intends to rule. By including this in the credits, the show was connecting Cersei's obsessive control over the physical space of the map to the broader visual language of cartography and power that the opening sequence had always embodied. Easter egg number 7. The locations in the credits do not always match where characters end up. This is a more subtle one. There are episodes where a location appears in the opening credits, the camera visits it in its mechanical dance across the map, and then in the episode itself, the narrative barely spends any time there. This was sometimes because filming schedules and writing decisions diverged late in production. But eagle-eyed fans noticed that occasionally, a location would appear in the credits of an episode right before something significant happened there in the following episode, as though the map itself were slightly ahead of the story, like a dream that arrives one night early. Easter egg number 8. The compass rose is different in different regions. For those who paused the credits and looked very carefully at the cartographic details on the flat map surface, the show's world-building extended even here. The stylization of different regions of the map, the texture of the terrain, the way settlements were marked, the visual vocabulary used for different cultures, changed depending on which part of the world the camera was over. The free cities of Essos were rendered differently from the kingdoms of Westeros, which were in turn different from the far eastern lands beyond the known world. This is the kind of detail that nobody was ever going to notice in the half-awake state of waiting for an episode to begin. But it was there, because the people who made this show were the kind of people who put things like that into opening credits maps. Easter egg number 9. The theme music changes, subtly based on the episode's tone. Composer Ramin Djawadi, who created the iconic Game of Thrones theme, has spoken about how the opening music was treated with more flexibility than viewers might realize. While the main theme is consistent, the orchestration and instrumentation were sometimes adjusted for specific episodes. Episodes centered on the Starks leaned into the cellos and the more austere, northern feeling of the composition. Episodes set in the South, or involving Lannister storylines, incorporated different tonal qualities. These changes are subtle enough that you would not consciously notice them, but they existed, building an emotional texture before the episode had even properly started. Easter egg number 10. The show's world was originally contained inside a sphere. This one is genuinely strange and lovely. The mechanical map in the opening credits exists inside a globe. The world of Westeros is portrayed as the inner surface of a sphere, with the central sun at its heart. This is cosmologically unusual. It implies the world of the show is not a planet like Earth, curved outward, but something more like a hollow world, curving inward. Whether this was meant as a literal statement about the physics of Westeros or simply a beautiful aesthetic choice by the designers, nobody has ever fully explained. But it gives the opening credits a sense of enclosure, of a world sealed within itself, which, if you think about it, is exactly what the Wall does geographically. A contained world with something older and darker outseed it. Section 3. The pilot episode. Everything you needed to know was right there. There is a school of thought that says a great pilot episode should be able to stand alone, that if you watched only the first episode of a show, you should understand its themes, its world, and in some fundamental way, its ending. Game of Thrones, in this regard, may be one of the finest pilots ever made, though perhaps not for the reasons that were obvious at the time. Because, looking back at the pilot now, knowing everything that comes after, the betrayals, the deaths, the decades of war, the ultimate fate of almost every character we are introduced to. The first episode of Game of Thrones is extraordinary in how much of the future it was quietly, almost cruelly, encoding. Easter egg number 11. The very first scene tells you that death has already visited the world beyond the wall. The show opens before the titles, before we have met a single named character, with 3 men of the Night's Watch riding beyond the wall. They split up. The third one finds the carnage first, bodies arranged in a spiral pattern in the snow, a pattern we will not understand the full significance of until much later. He runs, he finds his companions, and then the White Walkers arrive. The spiral pattern of the bodies is not random. It is a recurring symbol of the Night King and the Children of the Forest. The same pattern that appears in the caves below Dragonstone, drawn thousands of years earlier by the Children of the Forest themselves. The show was literally, in its very first image, showing you a symbol that would connect the origin of the White Walkers to their modern resurgence. Most viewers had absolutely no framework to understand this on first watch, but it was there, embedded in the opening seconds, waiting for the later seasons to give it meaning. Easter egg number 12, the dead direwolf and the dead stag found together in the forest. When Ned Stark and his sons come across the dead direwolf in the Wolfswood early in the first episode, the circumstances of her death are deliberate and specific. She has been killed by a stag. The antlers are still embedded in her throat, and nearby, the stag itself lies dead as well, killed by the direwolf in the same fight that killed her. Now, the direwolf is the sigil of House Stark. The stag is the sigil of House Baratheon. The scene we are looking at is, symbolically, both animals killing each other, both houses destroying each other in a conflict that leaves neither one standing. The direwolf, representing Ned, and by extension the North and the honor of the Starks, is killed by the stag, which is to say by Joffrey Baratheon and the machinery of the royal court. And the stag is killed in return, which represents the eventual extinction of the Baratheon line. Robert dies. Joffrey dies. Stannis dies. Renly dies. The house that killed the direwolf does not survive the encounter, the show's very first piece of symbolic foreshadowing, and it is sitting right there in the mud in the first 20 minutes, patient as a stone. Easter egg number 13, the direwolf pup count matches the Stark children. When the Stark boys find the pups, the count matters. There are 5 Stark children, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon, and there are 5 pups. Then Jon Snow, who is not technically a Stark but who grew up as one, argues for keeping them, and a 6th pup appears, set apart from the others, a white pup that the others missed. The 6th pup, Ghost, is an albino, pale and different from his siblings, like Jon himself in the household. The count was exact, and the symbolism extended further. Each direwolf's fate would mirror its owner's. Lady, Sansa's wolf, is killed early and unnecessarily at the command of Cersei, just as Sansa's innocence and her northern identity were stripped from her, early and unnecessarily by the cruelty of King's Landing. Grey Wind, Robb's wolf, is killed at the Red Wedding alongside his owner. Shaggy Dog, Rickon's wolf, is killed just before Rickon is killed at the Battle of the Bastards. In fact, Smaljin Umber presents Shaggy Dog's head as proof that Rickon has been captured, a visual announcement of what is coming. Summer, Bran's wolf, dies beyond the wall, sacrificing himself so Bran can escape. Just as Bran's old life, his body, his childhood, all of it, was sacrificed in service of the role he would eventually take on. Nymeria, Arya's wolf, is sent away by Arya herself in the 2nd episode to protect her from execution after Nymeria bites Joffrey. She survives, leading a great pack, wild and free and powerful, somewhere in the wilderness of Westeros. This mirrors Arya perfectly. Sent away from her home, surviving alone, building herself into something new and formidable. And Ghost, Jon's white wolf, survives everything. Every battle, every disaster, every death, including Jon's own death. Ghost is the only direwolf still alive at the end of the show, accompanying Jon into the true north beyond the wall, which is where Jon himself ends up. The parallel is complete. The wolves were always the Stark children, running alongside them. Their fates were tied together from that first scene in the mud. Easter egg number 14. Jon Snow's white direwolf pup hinted at his true identity. Jon's wolf was not just separated from the others and white to suggest his outsider status in the Stark household. White hair, silver white, platinum, is one of the defining physical traits of House Targaryen. Daenerys has it, Viserys has it, the Targaryen look. And Ghost, the white wolf of the boy who everyone thinks is Ned Stark's bastard, was carrying this hint visually from the very first episode. You could look at Ghost and see, if you knew what to look for, the bloodline that Jon was trying so hard not to know about. Easter egg number 15. Theon's rush to kill the direwolf puppies. When Ned initially suggests that the pups might be better off put down, they are too young to survive without their mother, and it seems a mercy. It is Theon Greyjoy who immediately draws his knife and steps forward. He is almost eager. There is something in his readiness to destroy something that belongs to the Starks that reads differently once you know who Theon becomes in Season 2, when he seizes Winterfell and spends seasons betraying the family that raised him. Easter egg number 16. Ned's shadow execution in the pilot. In the very first episode, we see Ned Stark personally carry out an execution, the beheading of a Night's Watch deserter. This is introduced as a characteristic act, something the Starks do because they believe that the man who passes the sentence should carry out the execution himself. But the visual of it, Ned Stark kneeling, sword raised, neck bared, is a preview. The shapes of what will happen to him in the season finale are all here. He is both executioner and, in a certain light, the condemned. The show put Ned in the position of executor to show us, later, that he would be in the same position as the man kneeling before him. Easter egg number 17. Bran's archery scene and the Raven. Just before Bran sees the royal procession arriving at Winterfell, there is a brief shot that cuts from a raven in close-up to Bran practicing his archery. It is a small, easily missed transition. But ravens, in Game of Thrones, carry messages. They are the system by which information travels across Westeros. And Bran, of course, becomes the three-eyed raven. The shot of a raven followed immediately by a shot of Bran was, intentionally or not, a visual association that would only become meaningful much later. Easter egg number 18. The Crypt of Winterfell and what Ned sees. When Robert Baratheon arrives at Winterfell, he and Ned descend into the crypt to visit the tomb of Lyanna Stark, Ned's sister, the woman whose death triggered Robert's rebellion. The scene is framed around grief and old love and old war, but the geography of it contains something extraordinary. As Ned holds his lantern up in the darkness, the camera shows us that the crypt extends beyond Lyanna's tomb. There are empty tombs ahead, waiting. The camera pauses on them for just a moment, long enough to notice. Those empty tombs are for Ned and his children. The show was showing us, in the Crypt of Winterfell, the space is already prepared for the deaths that were coming. The Starks were, from the first episode, already in their own future resting place. Easter egg number 19. The King's Landing throne room and Littlefinger's music. When news of Jon Arryn's death arrives at Winterfell, and Ned learns he is being called to serve as the new hand of the king, there is a specific musical sting in the background. It is Littlefinger's theme, a sneaking, unsettled motif that the show associates with Peter Baelish. The implication is clear in hindsight. Littlefinger had Jon Arryn murdered. Littlefinger arranged the series of events that brought Ned to King's Landing, and his musical signature plays in the moment that Ned first hears the news that will eventually get him killed. Ramin Djawadi planted this deliberately. The composer has confirmed that character themes were used to drop sonic hints about who was responsible for what. Easter egg number 20. Daenerys' first scenes and her brother's clothes. When we first meet Daenerys Targaryen in the pilot, she is dressed in pale, almost washed-out colors, soft blues and silver grays, nothing that announces her as the fire and blood Targaryen she will become. Her early wardrobe is, essentially, the color palette of someone who has not yet found themselves. But look at what she wears more carefully, and then look at what her brother Viserys wears. There are architectural similarities between the two wardrobes, subtle structural echoes. Costume designer Michelle Clapton has confirmed that this was intentional, a visual suggestion from the very first episode that Daenerys and her brother were cut from the same cloth, which becomes a very dark kind of foreshadowing when Viserys reveals himself to be cruel and delusional and obsessed with reclaiming power at any cost. Daenerys spends most of the series distinguishing herself from her brother, but the costumes were always quietly asking, "Are you sure?" Section 4. The Direwolves, Living Prophecies in Fur and Bone. We touched on the direwolves in the pilot section, but they deserve a much longer exploration because the level of detail that the show put into the parallel between the wolves and their owners went far beyond their fates. It extended to their personalities, their behaviors, and even the specific moments chosen to show them. Easter egg number 21, Lady died on the road to King's Landing, like Sansa's childhood. Lady is killed in episode 2 of the entire series. She has barely existed on screen. And her death is not grand or heroic. It is a piece of political theater, a small cruelty demanded by Cersei after Joffrey provoked Nymeria and got bitten. Ned has to kill Lady himself, because nobody else seems willing to do it decently. Lady's death happens on the road to King's Landing, before Sansa has ever set foot in the city, before she has experienced any of what is waiting for her there. The wolf dies before the girl's true suffering begins. It is almost as though the wolf's death is the last piece of Sansa's innocent northern self that survives the journey. Once Lady is gone, the Sansa who knew nothing but Winterfell is also gone. Both of them die on the road south. Easter egg. Number 22, Ghost, always returned to Jon's side after death. There is a specific and deliberate pattern to Ghost's appearances in the show. The wolf disappears during periods when Jon Snow is in danger or in the wrong place or making catastrophic decisions. And he returns, materializes, sometimes seemingly from nowhere, in moments of protection or restoration. Before the Battle of the Bastards, Ghost is present and then sidelined. Jon almost dies. After Jon is resurrected, Ghost is there. Before Jon goes beyond the wall in Season 7 on his suicide mission to capture a White, Ghost is not shown. When Jon returns to Winterfell, Ghost is waiting. The wolf's presence and absence tracks Jon's alignment with his own true nature. When Jon is being his most purely honest self, the protector, the leader who serves rather than seeks power, Ghost is close. When Jon is lost or compromised, Ghost is somewhere else. Easter egg number 23, Nymeria's pack in the wilderness, paralleled Arya's faceless men training. When Arya drives Nymeria away in Season 1, it is an act of love and pragmatism. Save the wolf, even at the cost of their bond. For seasons, Nymeria simply vanishes. And then in Season 7, Arya is heading north to Winterfell, and she encounters a wolf in the dark. A huge wolf, surrounded by dozens of others. She recognizes Nymeria immediately. She asks her to come south with her. Nymeria turns and leads her pack back into the wilderness. And Arya watches her go and says quietly, "That's not you." It is a direct callback to a line from Season 1, when Ned is trying to tell Sansa about the life she will have as a lady of court, quiet and contained and ladylike. And Arya says that is not her. It is the same words, spoken years later, in a forest to a wolf. And the meaning is the same. Nymeria has become something wild and free and pack-leading and powerful, and that is her nature now. Just as Arya's nature is something that does not fit neatly into any castle or court. They are the same, these two. They always were. Easter egg number 24. Ghost was the only direwolf not shown dying on screen. Every other direwolf death in the show was made explicit. The camera showed them dying. We saw Lady, we saw Grey Wind, we saw Summer, we saw Shaggy Dog's severed head. We saw the manner of each death. Only Ghost, Jon's wolf, survived the entire series without a single on-screen moment of peril that was not survived. This was not accidental. Ghost's invulnerability, his persistent survival, was the show tracking Jon's own repeated escapes from death, the resurrection, the multiple betrayals survived. Easter egg number 25. The direwolf pups were found at the exact spot where the stag and direwolf died. This is a detail from the books that the show maintained. The direwolf pups were not found wandering. They were found clustered around their dead mother, in the same spot where she and the stag had killed each other. The Stark children inherited their wolves from a site of mutual destruction. Their family line's future was handed to them literally at the point of death. The story of what is coming was embedded in where they found them. Easter egg number 26. Rickon's wolf was the first to be lost, and he was the first to die. Among the 5 Stark children who had wolves, Rickon and his wolf, Shaggy Dog, were the most marginalized, the least developed, the youngest, and most vulnerable. Rickon disappears from the narrative for entire seasons at a time. His wolf is the least seen. And then when Shaggy Dog's head is presented at Winterfell, proof that Rickon has been captured. The confirmation of the wolf's death is also a death sentence for the boy, even before we see it happen. The show had established the rule: when the wolf dies, so does the Stark. And so it was. Section 5. The Iron Throne's Secret Guests. 1,000 swords and a few you'd recognize. The Iron Throne is one of the most iconic objects in the history of television. It is unavoidable, instantly recognizable, a piece of production design so distinctive that it has become genuinely cultural shorthand. You could draw the silhouette of that chair, and people who had never watched an episode would know what they were looking at. And it turns out, if you look very carefully at that chair, you will find a very old friend or two. Easter egg, number 27. Gandalf's sword, Glamdring, is embedded in the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne is supposed to be made of 1,000 swords, melted and fused together by the breath of the dragon Balerion the Black Dread, after Aegon Targaryen's conquest of the Seven Kingdoms. In practice, of course, building a prop of that complexity required the production team to use a great many sword casts from various sources. Some of those sources were rather famous. A sharp-eyed fan going by the username No More Hodoring on Reddit spotted something extraordinary while pausing footage of Joffrey on the throne. There, near the center of the throne's back, was a sword. Specifically, it was a cast of Glamdring, Gandalf's sword from The Lord of the Rings. The hilt was unmistakable to anyone who had spent enough time with that particular weapon in that particular fantasy franchise. George R.R. Martin has spoken at length about his admiration for Tolkien and the influence of Middle-earth on his own world-building. Finding Gandalf's sword folded into the Iron Throne feels, in that context, almost like a tribute, like Martin had found a way to acknowledge the tradition he was working within. Easter egg, number 28. The sword from Kingdom of Heaven is also in the throne. The same Reddit investigation identified another recognizable weapon: the sword used by Orlando Bloom's character in Ridley Scott's 2005 Crusades epic Kingdom of Heaven. Several other swords from that film appear to have been cast and worked into the throne's construction. Easter egg number 29. The throne itself acknowledged its own inaccuracy. The books describe the Iron Throne as an enormous, overwhelming structure, a truly massive seat built from literally thousands of swords, jagged and dangerous, the kind of thing you could cut yourself on just trying to sit down. Martin himself has expressed something like disappointment that the prop built for the show, while dramatic and visually powerful, is considerably smaller than the throne he imagined. But here is where the show paid tribute to its own limitation. In one scene, Varys tells Littlefinger that the Iron Throne was made from 1,000 blades taken from the hands of Aegon's fallen enemies, forged in the fiery breath of Balerion the Dread. And Littlefinger, with his usual dry amusement, replies, "There aren't 1,000 blades. There aren't even 200. I've counted." The show, in a moment of remarkable self-awareness, put the criticism of the prop directly into the script. Littlefinger was speaking for every sharp-eyed book reader who had looked at the throne and thought, that does not look right. Easter egg number 30. The throne was destroyed in exactly the way Daenerys could not quite bring herself to avoid. When Drogon melts the Iron Throne in the finale, burning not the man who killed his mother, but the object that represented everything she died for, it is an act of profound symbolic weight. Dragons made the Iron Throne. A dragon destroys it. The cycle that began with Aegon's conquest ends here, in the same fire. The throne returns to slag, which is what it always essentially was, the melted-down weapons of people who lost. Section 6 borrow some costumes that were writing the story while the dialogue was looking the other way. Costume designer Michelle Clapton spent years building into one of the most sophisticated visual systems ever put into a television show. Every piece of clothing in Game of Thrones was doing work. Some of it was obvious. You could tell a Stark from a Lannister at 50 paces. But some of it was a much subtler kind of storytelling, encoding character arcs and prophecies and betrayals into the cut of a collar or the color of a hem. Easter egg, number 31, Sansa's wedding dress. To Tyrion was stitched with her life story. When Sansa Stark was made to marry Tyrion Lannister in Season 3, Clapton designed a dress that was, on the surface, suitably Lannister in its richness. But stitched into the fabric were motifs drawn from Sansa's own history. The gray and blue embroidery carried Tully fish scales, a reference to her mother's house, Catelyn's heritage. alongside Stark wolves and other symbols drawn from the northern life she was being forcibly separated from. She was wearing her own biography, her own identity, encoded in thread, forced to carry someone else's name. Easter egg number 32. Littlefinger's mockingbird brooch was always pointing at him. Petyr Baelish's sigil is the mockingbird, a creature known for mimicking others, for appearing to be something it is not. Littlefinger's costumes consistently incorporated small mockingbird motifs. This was Michelle Clapton's way of annotating his character for those paying attention. Every scene where Littlefinger was lying, playing a role, presenting a facade, which was essentially every scene he was ever in, his coat was quietly showing you what he was. The mockingbird wears no face of its own. It only ever borrows other songs. Easter egg number 33. Cersei's costumes evolved from Baratheon yellow to Lannister gold as she seized more power. In the early seasons, Cersei's wardrobe is rich but relatively conventional for a queen consort. Warm colors, jewelry, elaborate but feminine construction. She is, ostensibly, Robert's wife and queen. As the seasons progress and Cersei's own power grows, as Robert dies, as Joffrey is controlled, as Cersei herself moves from queen mother to regent to eventually queen in her own right, her costumes become increasingly severe. The cuts become more architectural. The colors shift from warm Baratheon yellows and honeyed tones to the harder, colder gold of pure Lannister power. By the time Cersei finally sits on the Iron Throne herself, she is essentially wearing armor. Her clothes have become battlements. Easter egg number 34. Daenerys started in her brother's color palette and ended wearing his values. Daenerys's early costumes, the pale blues and grays and almost translucent fabrics of her time among the Dothraki, were, as we mentioned earlier, structurally similar to Viserys's wardrobe. But there is a specific color note that Clapton built into the arc. As Daenerys grows in confidence and power, her clothes begin to incorporate deeper colors, reds. Eventually, as she crosses to Westeros, she arrives in black and red, the colors of House Targaryen, the colors of fire and blood. And the silhouette of her final costumes is increasingly militant, structured high collars, elongated cuts, precise and severe. By season 8, Daenerys is dressed in a way that echoes, very uncomfortably, the images of conquerors and absolute rulers throughout history. The clothes stopped being about the kind, thoughtful person she was trying to be, and started being about the kind of ruler she was becoming. The transformation was in the fabric, long before it was in the dialogue. Easter egg number 35. Daenerys's white fur coat entering Winterfell had streaks of red like blood. When Daenerys arrives at Winterfell in the season 8 premiere, one of those long-awaited arrivals that the show had been building to, she is wearing a spectacular white fur coat streaked with red. The obvious reading is Targaryen colors. White for the ice of the north, red for the fire of her house. But Clapton has spoken about wanting the coat to have an ambiguity, a darkness. Those red streaks do not look like house colors when you look at them long enough. They look like blood against snow. She arrives at Winterfell on the back of a dragon, wrapped in something that looks like evidence of violence. And the North does not give her the welcome she believes she deserves. The coat was telling you, before anyone said a word, that this arrival was not going to go the way she imagined. Easter egg number 36. Sansa's costumes tracked her transition through each captor's visual language. Sansa's wardrobe across the series is one of the most extensively discussed elements of the show's costuming. Each major phase of her captivity is visually coded. In King's Landing, her clothes gradually incorporate more Lannister aesthetics. She is being assimilated, dressed to please others, her own northern identity stripped away stitch by stitch. When Littlefinger takes her to the Eyrie, her clothes shift again, becoming darker and more enigmatic. When she arrives at Winterfell under the Bolton occupation, the severity of her costumes reaches its worst point. And then, as Sansa gradually reclaims herself, after the Battle of the Bastards, after Jon retakes Winterfell, after she begins operating as a political force in her own right, her costumes return to the north. The materials become heavier and warmer. The color palette shifts back to grays and blues. By the time she is crowned queen in the north in the finale, her final look incorporates elements from every stage of her journey. Stark wolves, Tully fish scales, Lannister-influenced structural elements, all synthesized into something that is entirely, unmistakably hers. The finale dress is, as reviewers noted at the time, a visual summary of everything she went through to arrive at that moment. Easter egg, number 37. Arya's clothes were specifically made to look like she had no clothes. This is a slightly different kind of costume observation. The choice to dress Arya in worn, practical, increasingly anonymous clothing as the series progressed was not just about the practical realities of her situation. A girl on the run, a girl in training, a girl who needed to be overlooked. It was about identity erasure. The faceless men training she undergoes is literally about having no face, no name, no distinguishing features. And Arya's costuming tracks this. She becomes visually harder to pin down. Where other characters have elaborate, distinctive looks that announce who they are, Arya becomes increasingly difficult to read from her clothing alone. She wears what she needs to wear to not be noticed. The costume department was building her into the character years before the plot caught up. Easter egg, number 38. Jon Snow's costume at the wall was specifically designed to separate him from both the Starks and the Night's Watch. Jon Snow's early costume at Castle Black is Night's Watch black, obviously. But Clapton designed details that kept him visually separate from the full assimilation into either camp. His fur trim and construction carried subtle northern echoes that were different from the plainer Night's Watch brothers around him. He looked like someone who belonged there, but also carried somewhere else with him, which is exactly what Jon always was. A person who fit nowhere perfectly, carrying multiple identities, belonging fully to none of them. Section 7. Foreshadowing in dialogue and names, the words that were working overtime. The writers of Game of Thrones were extraordinarily careful with language. Dialogue lines that seem like character moments or simple exposition were often doing much harder work, planting seeds that would flower several seasons later. Some of these are so precise they feel almost impossible, as though the writers knew from the earliest seasons exactly where they were going, and every word was chosen accordingly. Easter egg, number 39. Shireen teaches Davos to read, and the first word is Aegon. In Season 3, Shireen Baratheon takes it upon herself to teach Davos Seaworth to read. The book she uses is called A History of Aegon the Conqueror. She sounds out the title for him. This word is Aegon, she says, carefully. When you see the A, E, and G together like that, it sounds like egg. And the title of the whole book is A History of Aegon the Conqueror. Jon Snow's real name is revealed in the Season 7 finale, Aegon Targaryen. He is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, legitimately born, with a better claim to the Iron Throne than Daenerys. Davos Seaworth will become one of his most loyal allies, and the first word Davos ever learned to read was the name of his future king. Even actor Liam Cunningham, when shown this, admitted he had absolutely no idea this moment would carry that meaning when they filmed it. The writers embedded the Easter egg years ahead of the reveal, in a quiet scene between a small girl and a gruff smuggler that nobody would have thought to scrutinize. Easter egg number 40, Syrio Forel and the first lesson about death. What do we say to the god of death? Syrio asks Arya, first episode they train together. Not today, she answers. These words come back, very specifically, when Melisandre arrives at Winterfell before the long night and repeats the same exchange with Arya before the battle. It closes a circle that had been open since the second episode of Season 1. Arya's first lesson in survival becomes her last instruction before the most important kill in the history of Westeros. Easter egg number 41. Melisandre's vision of brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. When Melisandre looks into the flames for Arya in Season 3, she sees something that unsettles her. She mentions eyes, brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes she will shut forever. This was not understood at the time. It was treated as mysterious and ominous and left to float. But by the end of the show, it had become a precise inventory. Brown eyes, Walder Frey, killed by Arya in the Season 7 premiere. Blue Eyes, the Night King, killed by Arya with a blade through his heart in Season 8. Green Eyes, this one was debated, but the closest candidate was Cersei, whose eyes are consistently described as green, and who dies in the destruction of the Red Keep. Melisandre saw Arya's kill list in the fire years before Arya had assembled it. Easter egg number 42, Varys and Littlefinger's exchange about the Iron Throne's sword count. As mentioned earlier in the Iron Throne section, the exchange where Varys describes the throne and Littlefinger corrects the sword count is both a nod to the book fandom's observation about the prop and a piece of character work for both men. Varys deals in accepted narratives, in mythology, in the stories that power tells about itself. Littlefinger counts things, measures them, reduces the mythological to the practical. This single exchange tells you almost everything you need to know about who these men are. Easter egg number 43. Ollie was told he always comes back. Before Ollie participates in the mutiny that kills Jon Snow in the Season 5 finale, he goes to Sam Tarly with concerns about Jon's decision to let the wildlings through the wall. Sam, trying to be comforting, tells Ollie he always comes back. It was meant to refer to Jon's physical returns from beyond the wall, but, of course, Jon literally comes back from death in the following season. Sam said the truest possible thing in that moment, and neither of them understood quite how literally it would be taken. Easter egg number 44. Ned Stark's line about killing and judging. In the first episode, Ned tells Bran, "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." He is talking about justice and honor, the principles by which the Starks have always governed. It is also, in retrospect, the very principle by which Ned himself is killed. Robert Baratheon passes his sentence. Joffrey claims the authority to enforce it, and the execution is carried out personally by Ilyn Payne on Joffrey's order. Ned's death violates the exact principle he taught his son. In the same episode he taught it. Easter egg number 45. The North remembers. This phrase appears several times across the series, said by different characters at different moments. It is always presented as a cultural maxim, a piece of Northern identity, but it pays off in a very specific way in Season 7, when Arya, wearing Walder Frey's face, hosts a feast for the Frey men responsible for the Red Wedding and massacres them. The North remembers. That is what that scene is. The entire Red Wedding, avenged by a girl who was present for it. The phrase was not just a motto, it was a promise. Easter egg number 46. Jorah's name was an astonishing piece of foreshadowing. Ser Jorah Mormont, the Bear of Bear Island, loyal to Daenerys until the very end, infected by grayscale and healed by Sam Tarly, dying in the Battle of Winterfell. His name is worth looking at in the context of the books, where the foreshadowing is even more explicit. But, even in the show, Jorah's father is Jorah Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The bear sigil of House Mormont, the bear he carries on his shield, is a visual of something immovable, something that stands its ground. And Jorah never stops standing his ground for Daenerys, quite literally until the moment he dies protecting her. Easter egg number 47. The phrase Dracarys was introduced as a dinner instruction before it became a death command. When Daenerys is with the Qartheen and she is trying to demonstrate her dragon's power, she teaches Drogon the word Dracarys, meaning dragonfire in High Valyrian. Initially, it is used in relatively low-stakes situations as a training instruction, but over the course of the series, Dracarys becomes increasingly loaded. It becomes Daenerys' word for fire and destruction. By Season 8, when she whispers it over King's Landing and Drogon obliges, it has turned from a training word into a command that kills thousands. The escalation of the word's weight mirrors the escalation of Daenerys' own moral transformation. Easter egg number 48. The phrase, "Chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder." Littlefinger's speech to Varys in Season 3, a declaration of his philosophy, of his relationship to power and instability, is one of the show's most quoted lines, but it pays off in a specific visual way seasons later. When Bran has become the three-eyed raven and Littlefinger tries to use his dagger of Valyrian steel to manipulate Bran, Bran responds by repeating Littlefinger's own words back at him. Chaos is a ladder. Littlefinger's expression in that moment is extraordinary. He is looking at someone who saw the speech he gave in that private room, someone who was watching, through time, through the Weirwood network. Bran knew. And Littlefinger understood, in that moment, that the game was over. Easter egg number 49. Sam's toast in the Season 7 premiere. In the Season 7 premiere, as Sam endures his deeply unpleasant daily routine at the Citadel, a montage so vigorously disgusting that it practically announced it was there for something other than pure entertainment. There is a brief moment where Sam lifts a bowl of food in a kind of toast to the universe. It is a throwaway gesture, but the bowl he is holding is almost identical to the chamber pot he was emptying moments before. The show was making its point about the Citadel's relationship to knowledge versus reality, about institutions that have enormous libraries and very little connection to the actual world. Sam eventually leaves because the knowledge is there, but no one will act on it. The bowl and the chamber pot being the same bowl was just the show having one very dark visual joke about that theme. Easter egg number 50. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Eggerty's repeated insistence that Jon Snow knows nothing about the real world, about love, about the wildlings, about the way life actually works for people who are not protected by castle walls, is one of the show's signature lines. It is funny and teasing, and then, as their relationship deepens, heartbreaking. But it is also true in a way that the show consistently confirmed. Jon's repeated mistakes, his idealism, his inability to read political situations accurately, the show supported Eggerty's assessment throughout its run. He did not know. He learned, but the learning cost nearly everything, over and over again. Section 8. The House of the Undying, a vision that told you Daenerys' entire story. There is a case to be made that the single most extraordinary piece of foreshadowing in Game of Thrones, the most dense, the most precisely executed, the most devastating in retrospect, is a sequence that aired in the Season 2 finale in a city called Qarth, in a building called the House of the Undying. Daenerys walks into this building to rescue her dragons, and while she is inside, she experiences visions. Most viewers at the time understood these visions to be meaningful, but interpreted them as broadly symbolic or prophetic in the general sense. They were very much more specific than that. Easter egg number 51, the ruined throne room covered in what seemed like snow. The first vision Daenerys walks into in the House of the Undying is the throne room of the Red Keep. It is open to the sky. The roof has been destroyed. The Iron Throne sits amid rubble and debris, and falling through the open ceiling is something white. Something that settles over the Iron Throne and the ruined floor like snow. For years, fans debated this scene. Was it snow, as in cold weather, or snow, as in Jon Snow sitting on the throne? The argument went around in circles. Then in Season 8, Daenerys burned King's Landing. She flew Drogon over the city and destroyed enormous sections of it, including blasting the Red Keep itself. And when she finally walked into the throne room and found it ruined and open to the sky, the white material falling through the destroyed ceiling was ash, not snow, ash from the fires she had just set. The white substance in the vision was not snow from winter, it was the ash from her own destruction. The show, in Season 2, showed Daenerys the precise aftermath of the worst thing she would ever do. And she walked past the Iron Throne without touching it, which is exactly what happened in Season 8. She never sat on it. She came within arm's reach of it before Jon killed her. Easter egg number 52, the wall in the haunted forest. After the ruined throne room, Daenerys follows a sound and moves through a tunnel that opens onto what appears to be the north, the wall rising behind her, and beyond it the dark forest where the dead walk. She goes toward it, through it, toward a sound she is following. This is her journey in Season 6, 7, and 8. She came to Westeros and eventually went north, to the most dangerous place on the continent, in service of a fight that was not originally hers. The vision was describing, very broadly, the path she would take. Easter egg number 53, the Dothraki tent and the vision of Drogo. Beyond the wall in her vision, Daenerys finds a Dothraki tent. Inside it, Khal Drogo is alive, and their son is alive, and they are sitting as a family in a perfect version of everything she lost. It is warm, and he is there, and the baby she never held is there, and she almost stays. She almost sits down in this perfect false thing and lets it keep her. This was interpreted at the time as simply grief, a vision of what she had lost, a temptation to remain in the past rather than face the future. But there is another reading. Daenerys spent the entire series trying to build the world she saw in that tent. A family, people who loved her without political calculation. Home. The show was showing her what she was always chasing, and also showing her walking away from it. She chose the dragons over Drogo. She chose power over peace. She made that choice in the House of the Undying, and she made variations of it for the rest of the show. Easter egg number 54. She reached for the Iron Throne and did not touch it. In the throne room vision, Daenerys approached the Iron Throne and reached out toward it. Her fingers were barely an inch from the cold metal. And then she heard her dragons, and she turned and walked away from it. She never touched it. In the finale, she stood in the same ruined room, in the same configuration of ash and rubble, and she reached toward the same throne. And then Jon Snow came in, and they talked, and then Jon killed her before she ever sat down. She died within reaching distance of the thing she spent her life pursuing and never held it. The Vision told this story in Season 2, when she had not even left Essos yet. Easter egg number 55. The Vision implied she would win and lose simultaneously. Taken as a whole, the House of the Undying sequence in Season 2 told Daenerys' entire story. She would reach King's Landing and find it in ruins, ruins she caused. She would cross the north and stand in the cold. She would lose the family she was always trying to recreate, and she would die without ever sitting on the throne she won. The show encoded this in a 10-minute sequence 4 seasons before any of it happened. Either it was the most astonishing piece of advanced planning in television history, or the most fortunate accident of dream logic and symbolism. Either way, it is extraordinary. Section 9, props, sets, and hidden background details. Beyond the costumes and the dialogue and the major narrative moments, Game of Thrones was a show that lived in its details. The prop department, the set dressers, the directors of photography, all of them working together to build a world that rewarded very close attention. Easter egg number 56, the George W. Bush head on the spike. This one is not a deliberate Easter egg so much as a production accident that became a controversy, but it absolutely belongs in any comprehensive catalog of hidden things in Game of Thrones. In the Season 1 finale, when Joffrey shows Sansa the heads of the executed, including her father Ned's, mounted on spikes on the castle battlements, eagle-eyed viewers paused the footage and identified one of the prop heads in the background as a recognizable likeness of President George W. Bush. The showrunners addressed this directly and immediately, explaining that the decision to use the prop was purely practical. They needed severed heads and used what was available, and carried no political intent. HBO pulled the episode from digital platforms, edited the shot, and re-released it with an altered background prop. But the original version, for a brief period, was documented by thousands of viewers. It remains one of the most unintentionally remarkable background details in the show's history. Easter egg number 57, the Robb Stark and Talisa wedding ring. In the Season 2 finale, when Robb Stark secretly marries Talisa in a simple ceremony before the whole Red Wedding catastrophe unfolds, there is a specific visual choice in how the ring is shown. It is small and plain, a northern ring, nothing like the elaborate jewelry of the South. This ring becomes briefly significant in the lead-up to the Red Wedding, when the show is very quietly and efficiently tracking the things that are about to be lost. The ring is a symbol of the private, real, human thing that the political world is about to obliterate. Easter egg number 58. The weirwood tree at Winterfell had a face that changed position across seasons. The weirwood tree in the Godswood of Winterfell, the pale tree with the carved face weeping red sap, is a fixed point in the visual landscape of the show. But fans doing close comparisons of shots of the tree across different seasons noticed that the angle and expression of the carved face appeared to shift slightly between years. Whether this was a production decision to update the prop, or whether it was unintentional due to multiple different prop trees being used, it created an eerie impression that the tree itself was watching and reacting to what was happening around it. Given that weirwood trees are explicitly described as vessels for Bran's warging abilities and the collective consciousness of the children of the forest, an animated reactive tree face is entirely in keeping with the mythology. The show may have made this choice deliberately. Easter egg number 59. The books in Sam's Meister scenes at the Citadel referenced real historical events. The prop books visible on the shelves and tables in Samwell Tarly's scenes at the Citadel were not randomly chosen titles. Production researchers worked with the book team to create plausible-looking volumes that referenced actual events from Westerosi history, events from the novels, from Martin's companion texts, from the broader mythology of the world. Fans who paused and read the spines and covers identified books about the doom of Valyria, the conquest of Aegon, the Long Night, and a range of other historical events that connected the library to the broader world-building of the series. The prop books were, in their own way, a library of the show's lore. Easter egg number 60, the throne room mosaic map of Westeros, appeared before it was a plot point. In Season 7, Cersei uses a large painted map of Westeros on the floor of the Red Keep as a strategic tool. She literally walks on it and gestures across it while planning her military actions. But this map, or a version of it, was visible in earlier seasons as a background detail that nobody paid much attention to. It was there as an element of set dressing in the Red Keep long before it became a major visual element in Cersei's storyline. Its presence tracked the growth of her political ambition. As her control of King's Landing expanded, the map she was always surrounded by came to the foreground. Easter egg number 61, the teddy bear in Season 2. This one is strange and not entirely explained. In Season 2, in a scene involving wildlings beyond the wall, a sharp-eyed viewer spotted what appeared to be a teddy bear among the props and set dressing in the background, a modern-looking stuffed toy, completely out of place in the medieval fantasy setting. Whether this was an accident by the prop department, a deliberate inside joke by the crew, or something else entirely, nobody has fully clarified. It was noticed and documented by fans and quietly became one of the show's more baffling background details. Easter egg number 62. The Red Keep's interior carried visual echoes of the old Valyrian aesthetic. The interior design of the Red Keep, the specific stonework, the use of color, the architectural details that distinguished it from Winterfell and the Eyrie and the other castles, was designed to carry echoes of Valyrian building traditions. This is historically appropriate, since the Red Keep was built by the Targaryens, who came from Valyria. The dragon motifs, the specific quality of the stonework, the way light was handled in the throne room, all of it was built to feel like the tail end of a style that originated somewhere much older and far away. Easter egg number 63. Harrenhal's melted towers were precisely calibrated to show the effect of dragonfire. Harrenhal, the massive ruined castle that is basically the haunted house of Westeros, was destroyed by Aegon Targaryen's dragons during the conquest. The distinctive melted, twisted appearance of its towers was designed by the production team in consultation with historical accounts of volcanic damage and extreme heat effects on stone. The towers do not look like they were attacked by conventional fire. They look like something with far greater heat was applied to them at extreme speed and then removed. The visual language of the building was designed to carry the memory of dragons in every stone. Easter egg number 64. The brooch that changed hands was always meaningful. The Hand of the King brooch, the golden hand-shaped pin that marks whoever is serving as the king's chief advisor, passed between characters and was given and removed with extraordinary weight throughout the series. The visual of the brooch being given in the first season, Robert pinning it on Ned Stark, already carries the anxiety of what we are about to watch. When Ned throws it on the ground before Joffrey in the throne room, the gesture is one of the most significant visual moments of the first season. Everything that follows begins at that moment. Easter egg number 65, the Lannister gold, had a specific visual texture that distinguished it from other wealth. This is a detail about the production design philosophy, rather than a specific hidden object. The color gold in Game of Thrones was calibrated differently depending on who was wearing or using it. Lannister gold, the color of the lion, the color of their coins, the color of their armor, was given a slightly warmer, more saturated quality than the gold used in other contexts. It was meant to read as excessive, as specifically Lannister. The production designer and the director of photography worked together to ensure that whenever you saw Lannister gold, it felt slightly more present than it needed to be. Wealth that insists on being noticed. Section 10. The Citadel, Sam, and the meta twist that might have been there all along. Easter egg number 66. The entire show may be Sam's account. The connection between the opening credits' central astrolabe and the identical object hanging in the Citadel library opened a door in the fandom that was never quite closed. If the map we see in the opening credits is a map that exists in the Citadel, then the opening sequence, the overhead view of the world, the camera that moves between locations like an omniscient narrator, is perhaps not just a stylistic choice. Perhaps it is the view from inside the Citadel. The Maester's perspective, the perspective of the institution that records and preserves history. And if that is true, and if Sam Tarly eventually became the Maester who recorded and preserved the history of the events of the show, then what we were watching all along was Sam's book. His account of the War of the Five Kings and the Long Night and the fall of Daenerys and the coronation of Bran. The entire show, retroactively, might be the book Sam wrote. In the finale, Samwell presents a book to the council convened to decide the succession. He suggests it should be called A Song of Ice and Fire. This is, of course, the title of the book series the show was based on. The show ended by suggesting that the history it told was a book, written by a character inside it with the same name as the books outside it. It is a loop so elegant it is either the most carefully planned ending in television history or the most successful last-minute improvisation. Easter egg number 67. Aemon Targaryen's words to Jon echoed his own brother's story. Maester Aemon, the ancient blind maester at Castle Black, is a Targaryen, brother to King Aegon V, a man who chose duty over family, who stayed on the wall while his entire family died. His conversations with Jon Snow about duty and sacrifice and choosing what is right over what is easy are, on the surface, advice from an old man to a young one, but they are also, almost certainly, Aemon recognizing something of himself in Jon. He suspects what Jon is. He never says it. But his words about having lived through betrayal by love and survived it are the words of someone who has already been where Jon is going. Easter egg number 68. The connection between Maester Aemon and Daenerys. When Maester Aemon dies in Season 5, he whispers about Daenerys near the end. Egg, he calls her, confusing the present with his childhood. He was the great-uncle of the Mad King, the great-great-uncle of Daenerys. He had no idea she was still alive, but in his last conscious moments, he reached toward her, toward the family he had spent a century apart from. It is one of the most affecting moments in the show's run, and it connects two storylines, Sam and Aemon at the Wall, Daenerys and Meereen, that seem geographically and narratively distant. Easter egg number 69. Sam's reading lesson with Shireen was the show's way of teaching the audience. We have already discussed the Aegon Easter egg in that scene, but the scene as a whole has another function. Sam, who is literate and learned, has been established as the keeper of knowledge in the show's world. Shireen, who is teaching Davos, is connecting the common soldier who cannot read to the written record of history. This is what Sam eventually does for all of Westeros. He becomes the connection between the events that happened and the record that will survive them. The reading lesson is, in miniature, exactly what the Citadel exists to do, and what Sam will eventually do for the entire world. Easter egg number 70. The books that Archmaester Ebrose and Sam argue about referenced real Martin works. In their scenes together at the Citadel, Archmaester Ebrose and Sam have a conversation about the history Ebrose is writing of recent events in Westeros, a dry academic account that Sam finds disappointingly mundane compared to the scale of what actually happened. Sam suggests a better title. Ebrose dismisses him. The book Ebrose is writing is presumably eventually the same book that Sam will improve and correct and complete. This meta-narrative, a mediocre official account improved by an insider who actually lived through it, is a gentle joke about the relationship between institutional history and lived experience, but it also sets Sam up as the character who will eventually make the record real. Section 11. References, callbacks, and the wider world. Hidden in Westeros, Game of Thrones did not exist in a vacuum. It was made by people who loved books and films and other television and who could not resist, occasionally, hiding a nod to something they loved inside the frame of a scene. Easter egg number 71. The Lord of the Rings connections throughout. Beyond Glamdring and the Iron Throne, the connections to Tolkien run through the show in various ways. Jon Snow's companions at the Wall, his closest friends in the Night's Watch, are named Sam and Pip. In The Lord of the Rings, Frodo's dearest companions are Sam and Pippin. The parallels between Jon's journey north and Frodo's journey toward Mordor, the small party, the impossible mission, the weight of something ancient and world-ending, were not unintentional. Martin has been open about Tolkien's influence, and the show incorporated these nods with affection. Easter egg number 72. Monty Python and the Holy Grail left traces in the dialogue. Several lines of dialogue across the series appear to be quiet homages to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The most noted is when Littlefinger, while trying to comfort the grieving Robin Arryn after his mother's death, produces an oddly philosophical observation about the many ways people die, at dinner tables, in their beds, in undignified circumstances. The cadence and structure of the speech echo the Black Knight scene and other Monty Python moments in a way that appeared very deliberate, particularly given that it is Littlefinger delivering it, a character who is always performing a version of someone else. Easter egg number 73. The R plus L equals J theory was hidden in the literal stonework. Before the show confirmed that Jon Snow's real parents were Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, a revelation that had been the dominant fan theory for years, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something remarkable in the stonework of Winterfell. On a wall visible in certain scenes, someone had carved the letters R, L, and the word snow. The R and L were adjacent in a way that, to anyone who had spent time with the theory, immediately suggested R plus L. Whether this was a deliberate plant by the production team or a genuine coincidence in the texture of the set is impossible to verify, but it was noticed and documented. Easter egg number 74. The Hall of Faces contained recognizable masks. The Hall of Faces in the House of Black and White, the vast, eerie chamber where the many-faced gods' collection of stolen faces hangs, contained, according to several fans who freeze-framed and examined the footage carefully, faces that bore resemblances to characters who had died. Whether these were reused prop faces from previously killed characters or simply coincidental resemblances, the idea that the faceless men had been collecting faces from among the show's casualties gave the chamber an extra layer of meaning. Easter egg number 75. The Three Stooges are in the first novel and made it to the show. In the first book, when Catelyn Stark arrests Tyrion Lannister and is aided by 3 knights from House Bracken, their names are given as Larys, Mohor, and Curliket. These names are deliberate near anagrams of Larry, Mo, and Curly, the Three Stooges. This was George R.R. Martin hiding a piece of American comedy history in his medieval fantasy world, and the show maintained the names when it adapted this scene. Easter egg number 76. The Milk of the Poppy and Real Historical Analgesics. The painkiller used throughout the show, Milk of the Poppy, is an explicit reference to opium, derived from poppy plants in the real world and used as a painkiller and sedative throughout human history. The show's medical and herbal vocabulary was consistently drawn from real-world historical equivalents, grounding the fantasy medicine in actual practice. Grandmeister Pycelle's extensive use of milk, of the poppy, and other compounds, and the specific language used around their effects, reflected real medieval and early modern pharmacological knowledge. Easter egg. Number 77. The Map of Westeros and the Flipped Britain Connection. George R.R. Martin has confirmed that the map of Westeros was at least partially inspired by a map of Britain flipped upside down. If you take a map of Great Britain and invert it, the southern coast of England approximates the southern coast of Westeros around King's Landing, the north of Scotland approximates the northern reaches toward the Wall, and Ireland sits to the west like the edge of the Sunset Sea. This means that Winterfell is roughly where Inverness would be, and King's Landing sits in approximately the position of London. Easter egg number 78. The Night King's spiral pattern came from the Children of the Forest. We touched on this in the pilot section, but the full significance of the spiral is worth dwelling on. The spiral pattern that the Night King arranges his victims in, seen in the opening scene of the show, seen again when horse carcasses are arranged beyond the wall, seen in the cave paintings shown to Jon and Daenerys at Dragonstone, is the same pattern the Children of the Forest used in their own ancient rituals. The Night King was created by the children using a piece of dragon glass through the heart of a captured man. The spiral pattern is the original sigil of that act of creation. Every time the Night King arranged bodies in a spiral, he was leaving his maker's mark. Easter egg number 79. Melisandre's necklace and what it was actually doing. In Season 4, there is a scene where Melisandre is without her ruby necklace for a brief moment, and she appears old, ancient even. Then in the Season 6 premiere, she removes the necklace privately in her chambers and stands before a mirror, and she is revealed to be an enormously old woman, far older than she appears. The necklace, it seemed, was a glamour, a magical disguise that kept her appearing young and vital. Eagle-eyed fans had theorized this for years based on earlier glimpses, but the confirmation came in the Season 6 opener. The ruby choker she wore so consistently, so visibly, was always a hint that there was something very different underneath. Easter egg number 80, Bran warging into animals, was foreshadowed by his falcon scenes. Before Bran's fall from the tower, in his very early scenes at Winterfell, he is shown with a falcon, practicing the beginnings of falconry, learning to handle birds. Falconry is about the relationship between a human and a bird, about trust and training, and the bird's willingness to return. It is, in the miniature, the same relationship Bran has with the animals and eventually the people he wargs into. The falcon scenes were the earliest visual hint that Bran's relationship to the animal world was going to be one of the defining aspects of his character. Easter egg number 81, the rubies at the trident foreshadowed the rubies on Melisandre's necklace. when Rhaegar Targaryen was killed by Robert Baratheon at the Battle of the Trident, an event that happened 17 years before the show begins. His armor, decorated with rubies, was shattered by Robert's warhammer, and the rubies scattered across the river. This story is referenced multiple times in the show. The connection that fans drew was to Melisandre's ruby necklace, the same red stone, the same magical association. The rubies of Rhaegar's armor and the ruby of Melisandre's necklace both carry magical properties involving fire and light. Whether Melisandre's ruby necklace had any specific connection to Rhaegar's armor was never confirmed, but the visual and mythological parallel was too precise to be accidental. Easter egg, number 82, the Lannister twins and Cersei's specific choice of words. In her conversations with various characters about her relationship with Jaime, Cersei uses language that is very carefully calibrated. She talks about their birth together, about being one person split into two bodies, about Jaime being her other half. This language gradually reveals itself to be something she genuinely believes, not as poetic metaphor, but as a literal account of her psychology. She and Jaime were not just twins who became lovers. In her mind, they were a single entity. This is why Jaime's gradual separation from her, his growing conscience, his relationship with Brienne, his ultimate choice to go back to her rather than let her die alone, had such weight. He was not just leaving a lover. He was choosing his own identity over their shared one. Easter egg, number 83, the book, Fire and Blood, was published as a real text. George R.R. Martin eventually published a companion volume called Fire and Blood, documenting the history of the Targaryen dynasty from Aegon's conquest through the Dance of the Dragons and beyond. Characters in Game of Thrones reference this history. Samwell reads about it. Mimesters discuss it. It was eventually adapted as House of the Dragon. The meta-connection between the fictional historical text within the show's world and the real book that Martin published created a loop between fiction and reality that rewarded readers and viewers who knew both. Easter egg, number 84. Cersei's prophecy from Maggie the Frog was always being fulfilled. In the Season 5 premiere, a flashback showed young Cersei visiting a fortune teller named Maggie the Frog. The prophecy she received was specific. She would be queen, but a younger and more beautiful queen would come and cast her down. She would have 3 children, and all 3 would die. Her children were given golden crowns and golden shrouds. The golden crown foreshadowing was in the prophecy itself. The literal golden crowns that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen wore as rulers, and the golden shrouds of their deaths. Every element of this prophecy was meticulously fulfilled. Joffrey died at his own wedding feast. Myrcella was poisoned in Dorne. Tommen threw himself from a window after Cersei blew up the Sept of Baelor and inadvertently caused his wife's death. Cersei outlived all 3. And the younger and more beautiful queen who came to cast her down, Marjorie Tyrell, was one candidate, but Daenerys eventually fulfilled this role most completely. Easter egg number 85. The specific weapons used to kill major characters carried symbolic weight. Ned Stark was killed with ice, his own sword, by Ilyn Payne. The weapon that had been the instrument of Stark justice was turned against its owner. Robb Stark was stabbed at the Red Wedding, not in battle, not by a sword, but in a place of supposed safety by people who had been offered guest right. The violation of guest right is one of the most sacred prohibitions in Westerosi culture, and the specific horror of the Red Wedding was in the specific way the rules were broken. Joffrey was poisoned at his own wedding feast, killed at his moment of maximum public triumph by the very glass of wine that was meant to celebrate his happiness. Easter egg number 86, the Night's Watch vow, contains the entire arc of Jon Snow's story. The Night's Watch vow, which Jon Snow takes in Season 1, is, "Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father, no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch, for this night and all the nights to come." Jon Snow breaks almost every element of this vow, then is killed by his own brothers for breaking it, then is resurrected and released from his vows by his own death, and then spends the rest of the series fighting for everyone the vow asked him to protect. His entire journey is the story of what those words cost him and what they gave him. The vow he took in Season 1 was a complete map of everything he would sacrifice and violate and eventually redeem. Easter egg number 87, the mountain and the viper and the shadow of what was coming. When Oberyn Martell fights Gregor Clegane in Season 4 in Tyrion's trial by combat, the outcome is one of the show's most visceral shocks. Oberyn had it won. He was faster, more skilled, more agile. He was winning. And then he began talking, demanding a confession, getting too close, and the mountain grabbed him and crushed his skull with his bare hands. The shock of it was so complete that many viewers reported actual physical reactions. But looking back, the fight was constructed from the very beginning to end this way. The director shot Oberyn's style as beautiful but show-offy. He was performing for the crowd while fighting for his life. The mountain was mechanical, unstoppable, single-minded. The outcome was in their contrasting approaches from the very first exchange. Section 12, 88 to 135. The final gallery of hidden things, Easter egg, number 88. The Arya and Sansa needle scene was always a farewell. When Arya hides Needle, her sword, her most personal possession, the gift from Jon Snow, in the rocks outside the House of Black and White before going inside, the scene is framed as a departure. She is leaving behind the last physical object that connects her to who she was. But the way the show filmed it, the light on the blade, the care with which she placed it, suggested something more than practical concealment. It was a burial. She was burying Arya Stark and going inside to become no one. The sword she brought back out again, later, when she realized she could not be no one. The sword was waiting for her. She was always going to come back for it. Easter egg, number 89. The Weirwood eyes were always watching specific scenes. Several significant scenes in the show were staged with a Weirwood face visible in the background, the carved face with its red sap tears. These placements were not random. Key confessions, revelations, betrayals, and moments of truth tended to happen in front of or near Weirwood trees. Given that the Weirwood network eventually revealed itself as a surveillance system that the three-eyed raven could access, these background faces were, retroactively, witnesses. Everything confessed in front of a Weirwood tree was known to something older and stranger than the characters involved. Easter egg number 90, the crossbow Tyrion used to kill his father, was specifically Joffrey's. The crossbow Tyrion uses to kill Tywin in the Season 4 finale was the same crossbow that Joffrey possessed and was seen with earlier in the series. Joffrey used the weapon to threaten and humiliate Ros. Tyrion kills his own father with it. The weapon passed from the most publicly cruel Lannister to the most quietly devastating, and the lineage of that object connects the two deaths. Joffrey's poisoning, which Tywin partially enabled by protecting the family's interests, and Tywin's own death, which completed the Lannister family's self-destruction. Easter egg number 91. The famous phrase, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die," was said in the episode titled, "You Win or You Die." Cersei's iconic line to Ned Stark, the clearest statement of the show's central thesis, was delivered in an episode titled, explicitly, "You Win or You Die." The episode title itself was the spoiler. The show put the moral of the story in the episode's name before the character said it out loud. Easter egg number 92. The two towers of Harrenhal melted into the shape of two people embracing. This is a visual interpretation that a number of fans noted on rewatch. Two of Harrenhal's 5 towers, fused by dragonfire into melted, distorted shapes, appear from certain angles to look like two figures pressed together. Whether this was an intentional design decision by the production team or a piece of pareidolia, the human tendency to find meaningful shapes in random forms, the interpretation gained traction because Harrenhal is associated with doomed love and tragedy throughout the show's run. It was the castle where Jaime and Brienne were captured together. It was the seat of Tywin Lannister. It was the prize that nobody who won it ever prospered from. The shape of the towers matched the shape of everything that happened there. Easter egg number 93, the tourney at Harrenhal. Flashback contained the seeds of the entire war. The tourney at Harrenhal, referenced in flashbacks and conversations throughout the show, is the event where Rhaegar Targaryen crowned Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Love and Beauty rather than his own wife. This was, if you believed it was an insult to the Martells and an act of public passion toward Lyanna, one of the triggering events of everything that followed. Robert's Rebellion, the deaths of thousands, the burning of King's Landing, Jon Snow. All of it had one of its earliest seeds in a tournament where a young man put a crown of winter roses on a girl who belonged to someone else. The entire story of the show is downstream from that one moment, and the show kept returning to it. Easter egg number 94. Bran's dreams before his fall. In the pilot, Bran is having a dream about flying before he falls from the tower. He is shown climbing, looking out, the perspective of someone who is high up and looking down, feeling the precariousness of that height before he has any reason to fear it. The dream anticipates the fall, and also his later ability to actually fly, through ravens, through the animals he wargs into, through the three-eyed raven's gift of sight. He was dreaming about his future self before his past self was ready to understand it. Easter egg number 95. The Ghost of High Heart's prophecies each came true. The Ghost of High Heart, a character from the books who made it in limited form to the show, delivers prophecies that are eerily specific about events that have not yet occurred. Her visions of the Red Wedding. I dreamt of a man without a face, waiting on a bridge that swayed and swivered. On one side of the bridge was sunlight, and on the other side was darkness. Describe the event in terms that only made complete sense after it happened. Her prophecies were the show's most concentrated single passage of advance foreshadowing outside of the House of the Undying sequence. Easter egg number 96, the Battle of the Bastards and the shot that mirrored Daenerys. In the Battle of the Bastards, there is a moment where Jon Snow is buried under the press of bodies, suffocating, being crushed, almost certainly about to die for the second time. He forces himself upward through the mass of men pressing down on him, breaks the surface gasping, and stands. This shot, this specific framing of Jon rising from below, emerging from darkness into light, surrounded by chaos, had a precise mirror image in Season 3, when Daenerys was lifted above the heads of the people of Astapor, who were calling her Mahisa, Mother. She rose above the crowd, arms wide, the shot framed from below looking up. Jon rose through the crowd, arms fighting, the shot framed from within. Two sides of the same image, two people who were, though they did not yet know it, family, both shown rising through the mass of humanity around them. Easter egg number 97. Sir Pounce was named after a real cat on set. This is a lighter one. In Season 4, Margaery Tyrell is shown with a black and white cat named Sir Pounce, which she used to soften Tommen's attitude toward her when they first met. The cat was named and treated as a real character with a specific personality. The production team has confirmed that Sir Pounce was inspired by an actual cat that appeared on set during filming and whose affectionate presence endeared itself to the cast and crew. A real cat became a fictional cat who lived in a castle. Easter egg number 98. The show's color-coded storylines in the early seasons. Director of photography Alik Sakharov and others involved in the show's visual language have spoken about a system of color coding used in the early seasons to help distinguish storylines and signal tone. Scenes at the Wall and beyond were given cool, desaturated palettes, blue and gray, the color of cold and death and distance. Scenes at King's Landing were warm and golden, the color of wealth and fire and politics. Scenes with the Dothraki and then Daenerys and Essos were saturated and vivid, a warmer but stranger palette than either of the northern storylines. These color systems were not rigid rules, but general tendencies that the cinematography used to help the audience orient themselves across a large ensemble narrative. Easter egg number 99, the phrase, "A Lannister always pays his debts," was not the actual house words. This is a piece of in-world lore that the show handled with quiet precision. "A Lannister always pays his debts" is the phrase most associated with the family. It is repeated constantly, used as both boast and warning, but it is not the official house words of the Lannisters. The official motto of House Lannister is, "Hear me roar." The phrase everyone knows is not the motto. It is the reputation. It is what the Lannisters want you to remember. The show never made a big deal of this distinction, but it was always there for those who were paying attention. A family whose identity was built on financial power, preferring the language of commerce to the language of heraldry. Easter egg number 100. The moment Stannis sacrificed Shireen and the wooden stag. Davos carved. When Davos discovers the fragment of the wooden stag he had carved for Shireen, finds it burned and broken in the ashes of the camp, the show communicates an entire act of horror without showing it. We do not see Shireen's death directly. We see Davos find the remains of the only thing he had given her with genuine love, The wooden stag, the toy, the father substitutes gift to the child he had adopted in his heart. Its destruction is the destruction of everything gentle that had happened between these two people. Davos then confronts Melisandre, and the scene is one of the show's most restrained and devastating pieces of acting. Easter egg, number 101. Daenerys' dragons were named after people she loved and lost. Drogon was named after Khal Drogo. Rhaegal was named after Rhaegar Targaryen, her eldest brother who she never knew, but who she carried a complicated reverence for. Viserion was named after Viserys, the brother who terrorized and controlled her for most of her early life. She named a dragon after the person who abused her, whether this was forgiveness, compulsion, or simply the desperate act of someone trying to build a family out of the people she had lost. Even the ones who hurt her, the choice said something very dark about who Daenerys was and how alone she had been. Easter egg number 102. The three dragons were, symbolically, three aspects of Daenerys' relationship to power. Drogon, black, enormous, unchained, named after love, was the dragon she rode, her agency, her power deployed directly. Rhaegal, green, named after a brother who died for love, was the dragon that Jon Snow rode, the dragon that represented legitimate Targaryen bloodline. He was killed by Euron Greyjoy's scorpion bolt, a foreshadowing of how Jon's presence in her life would ultimately wound her. Viserion, cream and gold, named after the cruel brother, turned into an undead weapon by the Night King, became the most monstrous version of everything Daenerys feared she might become. Easter egg, number 103. The specific words of the Night's Watch Oath and how Jon returned to them. After Jon Snow is resurrected and effectively released from his Night's Watch vow by his own death, he gives command of Castle Black to Dolorous Edd and walks out. But the direction he walks in is north, always north. In the finale, after being exiled to the true north beyond the Wall as a political compromise, Jon does not stay at Castle Black. He walks further north than the Wall, into the actual wilderness, with Ghost and the wildlings. His watch never really ended. He was always going to go back. Easter egg number 104. The show's very last shot mirrored its very first shot. The show's final scene showed Jon Snow walking into the true north, through the forest, the wildlings around him, Ghost at his side. It was filmed in a way that deliberately echoed the very first scene of the very first episode. Rangers walking into the snow-covered forest north of the Wall. The show closed where it opened. The wilderness claimed its last son, and he walked into it willingly. Easter egg number 105. The number of times Tyrion was called a dwarf correlated with his growing power. This is a subtle character observation that fans doing deep analysis have noted. In the early seasons, when Tyrion was relatively powerless and dependent on his family's name, other characters used slurs and diminutives toward him constantly, and with impunity. As Tyrion rose in power, as Hand of the King, as Daenerys' advisor, the language used toward him shifted. Characters who would have dismissed him with cruelty in Season 1 were treating him as a genuine political threat in later seasons. The same body, the same man, different language. The show was tracking his power by tracking what other characters called him. Easter egg, number 106. Cersei's green wildfire and the Mad King's last command. When Cersei ignites the wildfire caches beneath the Sept of Baelor in the Season 6 finale, the explosion produces an enormous green fire that engulfs the building and kills everyone inside. The specific color and quality of wildfire, that vivid poisonous green, was also the color and quality of the fire that Aerys Targaryen intended to unleash on all of King's Landing before Jaime killed him. The Mad King's final command was to burn the city with wildfire. His son's killer lived in the city for decades, and then his son's killer's twin sister fulfilled the Mad King's wish with exactly the same weapon, on a smaller but still catastrophic scale, to achieve exactly the kind of absolute result Aerys would have recognized. Cersei became the Mad King in one afternoon. Easter egg number 107. The order in which the dragons died mirrored the order in which Daenerys lost things she loved. Viserion died first, the dragon named after the abusive brother, killed by the Night King's ice javelin and turned into an undead weapon. Rhaegal died second, killed by Euron, at the moment when Jon and Daenerys were beginning to fracture, when the truth of Jon's parentage was destroying the trust between them. Drogon, the last dragon, the one she rode and loved most, survived. He was the only one left when Daenerys died. And he destroyed the Iron Throne, not the man who killed her. Easter egg number 108. The Hall of Faces contained more faces than Arya's story required. When Arya is learning to move through the Hall of Faces, the scale of the collection is staggering. Thousands of faces. The many-faced god has been operating for a very long time, in many places, with many servants. The sheer quantity of faces was a quiet horror that the show let sit without explaining, the accumulated proof of a death cult that had been running its operation for centuries, one contracted killing at a time. Easter egg number 109. The White Walkers' ice formations created specific geometric patterns. When White Walkers arranged the limbs and bodies of their victims, the resulting patterns had a geometric consistency that was not random. The spiral pattern we noted earlier, radiating lines, the same aesthetic as the cave paintings in the Dragonstone caves, the same symbols that appeared in contexts associated with the Children of the Forest's ancient rituals. The Night King's aesthetic sense, if you can call it that, was the same aesthetic as the civilization that created him. He was always carrying the visual language of his origin. Easter egg number 110. The dragon skulls in the Red Keep were removed by Robert Baratheon as a deliberate act of history erasure. In the early seasons, we occasionally see the cellars and undercroft of the Red Keep, and they are empty of the dragon skulls that once decorated the Great Hall. The skulls of Aegon's dragons, and all the dragons of the Targaryen dynasty, had been displayed in the throne room for generations. Robert Baratheon had them moved to the cellars after he took the throne, a deliberate act of political symbolism, erasing the most visible evidence of Targaryen power. The skulls were still there, in the dark, but you were not meant to see them. When Arya chases her cat into the cellars in Season 1, she stumbles into them by accident. History, suppressed and moved underground, waiting in the darkness for someone to find it. Easter egg number 111. The Hound's fear of fire was shown before we were told the reason. In his first scenes, the Hound's unease around open flames and fire is visible in his body language, a slight withdrawal, a tension that other characters do not share. We are told the reason for this eventually. His brother the Mountain burned half his face when they were children, holding him in the fire as punishment for playing with his toys. But before we know this, the show has already shown us the effect. The cause followed the symptom, which is the reverse of how most storytelling works, and it made the revelation of what happened to him land harder. Easter egg number 112. The Red Priest's prophecies were all about the same person. The many followers of Halor, the Lord of Light religion, Melisandre, Thoros of Myr, the various Red Priests encountered across the show, all received visions and prophecies about a figure called Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the hero who would end the long night. Melisandre believed this was Stannis. Then she believed it was Jon Snow. The Red Priests in Volantis believed it was Daenerys. The prophecy was, simultaneously, sufficiently vague to be applied to multiple candidates and sufficiently specific to be falsifiable. This is exactly how prophecy works in the real world. It fits whoever survives. Easter egg number 113. Every time someone said winter is coming, the context changed what it meant. The Stark words, winter is coming, function on multiple levels simultaneously throughout the show. At their most literal, they refer to the long winters of Westeros, the need to prepare. As a house motto, they signify the Stark character, serious, unsentimental, oriented toward the future and its hardships. As the White Walker threat develops, they become prophecy. And as the Starks themselves suffer catastrophe after catastrophe, the phrase becomes something more personal, a reminder that the worst is always approaching. The show used the same 3 words to mean 10 different things across 8 seasons, and each meaning was present every time the phrase appeared. Easter egg number 114. Theon Greyjoy's name was always his curse and his redemption. Theon means godly in Greek. He was the ward, effectively the hostage, of Ned Stark. His name means godly, and he spent most of the show being anything but. Then, in his final act, charging alone at the Night King in the Godswood of Winterfell to buy Arya a fraction of a second, he was exactly what his name said. He died godly, the name he spent the whole show failing to live up to, he earned in his last breath. Easter egg number 115. The Iron Throne was, structurally, impossible to sit on comfortably. This is a thematic Easter egg more than a visual one. The Iron Throne is explicitly described throughout the show as not comfortable, as painful. Previous rulers cut themselves on it. It required physical endurance to hold court from it. The show played with this, consistently, as a metaphor. Power hurts. The seat of absolute authority is not built for ease. It demands something of whoever holds it. And the characters who wanted it most urgently, who wanted it easily, as a right, tended to be exactly the ones least suited to endure what it actually required. Easter egg number 116. The Dragon's Shadow over King's Landing in Season 1. When Daenerys first arrives at the great city of Astapor in Essos, and we see the city from a distance, she is flying on no dragon. She has not yet become a dragon rider, but in an earlier scene in Season 1, when King's Landing is shown from above, from the position of a bird or a very tall tower, there is a brief visual of a shadow passing over the city. The shadow is long and wing-shaped. It is gone in a second. It is easy to miss. And it will not make sense until the dragon's actual shadow passes over that same city in Season 8, as Daenerys flies Drogon above the burning streets. Easter egg number 117. Jaime Lannister's hand and what it cost him. Jaime Lannister loses his sword hand, his identity, his talent, the thing he was literally best known for, in Season 3, captured by Roose Bolton and maimed on the road. The loss is catastrophic for who Jaime believed himself to be. He had defined himself by his sword hand for his entire life. Without it, he had to become something else. And what he became, slowly and painfully, was a person with an actual moral compass instead of a tactical one. The hand that was taken from him was the hand he used to kill, the king, enemies, anyone who stood in the way. Losing it forced him to use the other one, the hand he never thought about, the one that was not the killing hand. Easter egg number 118. The coin Jaqen gave Arya was always her ticket home. The iron coin that Jaqen H'ghar gives Arya when they part ways in Season 2. The coin that opens the door of the House of Black and White when she shows it to any man from Braavos is called a Valar Dohaeris coin. Valar Dohaeris means all men must serve in High Valyrian. It is the companion phrase to Valar Morghulis, all men must die. Together they form the core philosophy of the Faceless Men. Everyone dies, and in service to death, everyone serves. Arya carries this coin for seasons, through everything, and when she eventually uses it, she is not joining the Faceless Men permanently, but beginning a journey that will end with her killing the Night King. She served death, and in serving death, she saved the living. Easter egg number 119. Sam's obsession with books was the show's way of telling us he survived. Sam Tarly, throughout the series, is the person who reads, who researches, who finds the obscure piece of information that turns out to be crucial. The dragonfire that kills White Walkers, the obsidian that kills them too, the information about the Horn of Winter. Sam finds things in books. This pattern established, very early, that Sam was going to be alive at the end of the story, because stories need their chroniclers to survive. The person who records history cannot be in it in the same way as the people who make it. Sam's function always required him to outlast the events he was studying. Easter egg number 120. Bran Stark was always being prepared to be king, even when no one knew it. Looking back at Bran's arc from the beginning, the shape of his journey, the fall, the paralysis, the gift of sight, the long, slow education in watching and understanding, the ultimately passive but total awareness of everything that happened in Westeros' history, is the exact preparation needed for the role he ends up in. A king who rules not through force or charisma or political cunning, but through the wisdom that comes from having seen everything. The show was building him for this from his very first scene. He was always climbing towards something, even before he fell. Easter egg number 121. The specific way Catelyn held the knife at the Red Wedding. When Catelyn Stark realizes what is about to happen at the Red Wedding, when she sees the chainmail under Roose Bolton's sleeves and understands that the music has changed and the doors are closing, her first instinct is to grab a knife, not to run, not to protect Robb, to grab a knife and hold it to someone's throat. This is the same instinct she showed in the first season, when she arrested Tyrion on the road and improvised her defense in a tavern surrounded by Lannister men. Catelyn Stark, when cornered, grabbed the nearest weapon and held it to a throat. The show was consistent about this. She was always the same person, doing the same thing at the end that she did at the beginning. It did not save her either time. Easter egg number 122. The Night King could not be killed by fire because he was made by the same process that creates dragonglass. The children of the forest created the Night King by pushing a piece of dragonglass through a man's heart. Dragonglass is obsidian, volcanic glass. The Night King was, essentially, made of something that had already been through fire and come out the other side. Fire could not kill him because he was already a product of fire, transformed. This is why Arya's blade, and not dragonfire, was what ultimately ended him. Cold iron, something his own process could not assimilate. Easter egg number 123. The show regularly used the height of characters to signal power. This is a visual storytelling technique used consistently throughout the show's run. Characters are regularly framed in ways that their physical height relative to one another signals their power dynamic. Tyrion is almost always filmed from slightly higher angles when he is at his weakest, and from lower angles when he is at his most powerful. The Mountain is almost always filmed from below, emphasizing his physical dominance. Daenerys on the back of Drogon is always at an extreme elevation. She is above everything. When Jon Snow kneels before her, the shot choice emphasizes his physical lowering as a political act. Easter egg number 124. The specific number of bells that were supposed to signal King's Landing's surrender. In the penultimate episode of the show, Daenerys waits for King's Landing to ring the city bells, which in the rules of warfare signal surrender. She waits longer, and then, when they ring, when the city has actually surrendered, when the enemy has laid down arms and the civilians are cowering in the streets, she burns everything anyway. The bells rang, she heard them, and she chose to continue. The detail of the bells, ringing at exactly the moment she was supposed to relent, was the show's most precise and devastating articulation of what Daenerys had become. It was not madness that took her. It was the choice she made when the madness was avoidable. Easter egg number 125. The white ravens that announced the changing of seasons were always from the Citadel. Throughout the show, the changing of the seasons, specifically the official announcement that winter had arrived, was communicated by the arrival of white ravens from the Citadel. Regular ravens are black. White ravens carry special messages, specifically the seasonal announcements that only the Citadel has the authority to make. In Season 6, Sansa receives a white raven at Winterfell, confirming that winter has arrived. This scene carries enormous weight. It is the moment where the stark words, "Winter is coming," finally cease to be a warning and become a statement of present fact. Winter had come. The house words were no longer a preparation. They were a description. Easter egg number 126. Dragonstone's architecture was a visual expression of the Targaryen identity. The physical design of Dragonstone, carved from a single volcanic rock into forms that all referenced dragons in some way, every tower a dragon's neck, every door a dragon's mouth, was described in the books and rendered in the show as an expression of the Targaryen psychology. They built their architecture in the shape of their most important relationship. Their home was made of dragons. When Daenerys arrived at Dragonstone for the first time in Season 7, touching the stone, walking through the corridors, standing in the map room, she was touching the most literal expression of what she was, the last Targaryen, coming home to a house that was built to receive her. Easter egg number 127. The Faceless Men's philosophy of death predicted the show's ending. The Faceless Men believe that all men must die, and in serving death, they serve a kind of justice, removing the pain of living from those who have suffered enough. This philosophy, filtered through Arya's story, ultimately produced the person who could kill the Night King, the embodiment of death itself. By accepting death, by being willing to give herself over to it, Arya became the one person who could look at the Night King and not freeze. She served the god of death, and so the god of death could not have her. Easter egg number 128. The specific way each major character's death was filmed matched their life. Ned Stark died in public, in daylight, on the steps of a great sept, his execution announced and witnessed by thousands. He lived his life in full view of everyone, transparently, making decisions he could defend openly. He died the same way. Robb Stark died at a feast, among allies who became enemies, in a confusion of trust violated. He had spent his life making alliances and leading armies through the faith people placed in his honor. He was killed through that same faith. Joffrey died choking, violently, unable to speak, unable to give orders or threaten anyone. He spent his life using his voice as a weapon. He died silenced. Easter egg number 129, Podrick Payne's family connection to the man who killed Ned Stark. Eileen Payne, the mute executioner who carried out Ned Stark's execution in the Season 1 finale, was the King's Justice. His squire, his family's connection to the wider story, was Podrick Payne, who later became Tyrion's squire and eventually Brienne of Tarth's. The Payne family threaded through the show in unexpected ways, connecting the moment of the show's first great shock to the later comedic warmth of Pod's relationship with Tyrion, and then to the dignity of his relationship with Brienne. The name that was first associated with death and complicity in royal cruelty was later associated with loyalty and gentleness. Easter egg number 130, the map on the floor of the Red Keep changed throughout the seasons. The painted map on the floor of the Red Keep, the one Cersei walked across and strategized over in her Westeros domination fantasy, was updated in the show's later seasons to reflect political changes. Territory shifts, the fall of houses, the movement of armies. The map was never static. It was being redrawn, slowly, to match the actual state of the world outside the window. Cersei stood on a map that was constantly becoming out of date. Easter egg number 131, the last weirwood tree in Bran's vigil. In the show's climactic final battles, Bran sits at the weirwood tree in the Godswood of Winterfell and wargs away, sending his consciousness elsewhere, leaving his body sitting motionless under the white branches while chaos unfolds around him. This is exactly what the three-eyed raven did for centuries in his cave, sat motionless and was present in everything simultaneously. Bran was already performing his final role before he was officially given it. Easter egg number 132, the song The Rains of Castamere was always a warning. The song of House Lannister, The Rains of Castamere, tells the story of the destruction of House Rain, a family that rose against Tywin Lannister and was annihilated so completely that only the song remembered they had existed. The Lannisters played this song at the Red Wedding as the signal for the killing to begin. It was not just incidental music, it was a message. It was the same message it had always carried. This is what happens when you stand against us. The last thing Catelyn Stark heard was the Lannister warning song. Easter egg number 133. The wall's magic was always failing. The wall was not just a physical barrier. It was maintained by magic, ancient spells that prevented the dead from passing through. These spells were established in the Night's Watch Oath, in the ancient understanding of what the wall was for. When Benjen Stark, who had become part of the dead world and could not pass south of the wall, mentioned that the magic kept the dead out, it confirmed what Sam eventually found in his research. The wall's protective power was mystical, not merely structural. When the Night King gained a dragon and destroyed part of the wall in the Season 7 finale, he did not just breach the physical barrier, he destroyed the magical one. The spell breaking was the wall falling. Easter egg, number 134. Arya's face in the final scene mirrored her face in the first episode. When Arya Stark stands at the prow of a ship heading west, toward uncharted waters and the edge of the known map, in the show's final moments, the expression on her face is one of open, clean curiosity. She is going somewhere nobody has been. She is following the edge of the world to find what is beyond it. It is exactly the expression she had in the first episode, when she was a girl shooting arrows from behind a door, watching the knights arrive, sneaking where she was not meant to be. Arya always wanted to see what was past the visible edge. The show began with her looking around a corner and ended with her pointing her ship at the horizon. The face was the same. Easter egg number 135. The very last words of the show were about a new story beginning. When Jon Snow walks north past the wall in the show's final minutes, the last lines of dialogue belong not to him, but to the world around him. The wildlings, Tormund, the land beyond. And then there is no more dialogue, just the images. The vast open country, the trees, the snow, Ghost running ahead, the sense of something impossibly large and quiet and open. The show, which began with men walking into that same cold country and finding death, ended with a man walking into it and finding something else. What exactly is never specified. It is the first question the show asks that it genuinely, deliberately, beautifully refuses to answer. Section 13. The closing, what we take away from a world that was always watching us watch it. There is something particular about a world built with this level of care. You spend enough time in it, and you begin to feel that the world is watching you back. That the Weirwood faces really are recording your reaction. That somewhere in the Citadel, a Meister is taking notes. Game of Thrones earned, over its run, a level of obsessive close reading that most fictional worlds never receive. Every frame was potentially significant. Every word could be a foreshadowing. Every visual choice was, quite possibly, a coded message. And the show genuinely warranted this attention, not as an exercise in paranoia, but because the team that built it actually put things there, regularly, across 8 seasons. What strikes me, going back through all of these details, is not just how many there were, but how they divided into types. Some were the showrunner's careful advanced planning, the placement of Aegon in Shireen's reading lesson, the Daenerys vision in Karth. These required knowing years in advance where the story was going. Some were the work of craftspeople who loved their medium. The costume details, the prop choices, the set dressing that extended the world into corners no camera was required to find. Some were the happy accidents of collaborative creation. The George W. Bush head, the teddy bear, the shadow over King's Landing that may have been nothing at all or may have been everything. And some were the work of an audience sophisticated enough to find meaning in a wall, in a carved stone face, in the way light fell on a sword. All of these together made the show something different from most television, something that rewarded return, that deepened with familiarity, that kept giving back even after the story was over. The world of Game of Thrones was built as a place where nothing was arbitrary, where the winter that was always coming eventually arrived, where the songs people sang told you what they were going to do before they did it, where the clothes on a character's back could narrate their inner life more honestly than anything they said out loud. It was a world worth looking at very carefully. And now, you have. Thank you for spending this time here with me tonight. If you found something here that you had not known before, or if it sent you back to the show with new eyes, or if it simply kept you company while you drifted towards sleep, then this has done exactly what it was meant to do. Drop a comment and tell me which of these was the one that genuinely surprised you, the one that made you want to go back and watch the scene again. And if you enjoyed this journey through Westeros, please consider subscribing. There are more worlds to walk through, more hidden things waiting to be found. The night is dark, and we are not quite done exploring it. Good night, sleep well. And may the details you notice tomorrow be stranger than the ones you notice today.